Shalom, welcome everybody to another shiur in Derech Hashem. I'm Eliyahu Shir from Chesed Ve'emet, www.lovingkindness.co. And in our shiur today, we're learning from the work written by Ramchal, Rabbi The Way of God. We're on chapter 3, a very exciting section, and it deals with very spiritual things like prophecy, inspiration, the nature of the soul. Now, the Ramchal is not going to tell us about how to perform magic. That's not his goal. But he is going to tell us how things work. If a person wants to know more about the magic side of things, well, the world of Kabbalah is open today. There are so many books available that one can learn and involve oneself in. It's absolutely fantastic. Not that one should do this in any way for ulterior reasons, but there is so much that one can learn on a superficial level and work himself up to higher levels. It becomes absolutely fascinating, and it really makes one feel like one wants to be close to Hashem, which is ultimately the goal that we're striving for. Everything that we're learning in Torah together is so that we will become better and be able to strive for a closeness with Hashem and to do whatever we can in this world that God wants us to do. And we're at this point in time where we've discussed that the Ramchal had told us that God had set up a world with night and day, and he'd set up a world with goodness and bad. He'd set up a world with contrast. And the reason that God did this is in order to allow free choice to take place. There are good beings in the world, there are bad beings in the world, just like in the physical world. In the physical world, there are people who are good and there are people that are not good. It's an amazing thing. It's something that I've discovered in my own life. And people think I'm crazy when I tell them this. But I'm saying there are people who are simply naturally good. They simply give. They have no ulterior motives. They just simply want to help. Then there are people who wish to be stingy and they want to hold back. And no matter how many times one says to them, please help, could you do this, could you do that? Nothing. One gets no response from them. It's like no matter how hard one tries, one gets nowhere. And the other fellow, he comes along and says, please, I would love to help. Good and bad. In the spiritual worlds, the same concept exists. There are beings that are good and they're there to help and bring blessing into the world. And there are beings that are negative, the klipots, the sitra akra, just like what we've been discussing all this time in the Tanya also. And these beings that are bad do everything that they can to cause problems. Now, God has caused there to be a world with good and bad so that there's free choice. And he also allows us to connect with the spiritual world where these angelic beings exist. And sometimes we can even call upon these beings to bring blessing into the world, depending on who we are, depending on our closeness to Hashem. If we use these means incorrectly, God can stop us anytime. The angels can stop doing their job, as the Ramchal has pointed out to us. On the other hand, there are times that a person can unfortunately use these particular methods in a negative way. And should that happen, he will be responsible for that. He will lose out. In fact, everybody will lose out. So we're learning principles here. And if we implement these principles correctly, we stand to gain together to be better and to connect with these higher worlds, which is also something positive, and ultimately bring down the positivity into this physical world to do more, to be better. So we're at paragraph number 9, and we're talking about another fantastic subject, which is called sorcery, regarding sorcery. I'm reading the Hebrew, and you can follow along in the English from the site safaria.org. It's free. Feel free to take a look at it yourself and follow along. If I'm not translating 100%, please take a look at the English and see if the English makes more sense to you. Go ahead and read it. V'hine, we're talking about the inyan hakshafim. We're talking about the matter of magic, of sorcery. V'hine, behold, al pi haderech hazeh. In this way, k'mo shehamatzi la'adam derech lasig bo he'ara. Just as there is a way for a person to comprehend and to attain this illumination, v'haskala. This is what a person can do. This is what God has given a human being to be able to do. That he can have an illumination in his mind. For Ruach HaKodesh, he can gain divine inspiration. And he gains it in a way that is not natural. Not in a natural way, not in a physical way. God allows a human being to acquire knowledge and spirituality in a way which is not in accordance with physical matters. This is an amazing concept. People who read the Hayom Yom, which is written by the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe, before he became the Rebbe, he wrote this book. And in one of the recent entries, he writes over there that up until the time of the Shach and the Taz, the great commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, he says over there that all of these people wrote down their commentaries with Ruach HaKodesh. They wrote it down with divine inspiration. Anybody who thinks this is crazy, I challenge them, because you can take their commentaries as they are, take a pen to hand, and begin writing out the commentary yourself by copying it. See how long it takes just to copy it. Now imagine taking that to a different level. Imagine not just copying it, but having to think out what that thought is before putting it to paper. But take it to another level where you've mastered the material of the Shulchan Aruch inside and out, and then you come up with the idea of what you're about to write, and then you put it to paper. How long would it take for the average person to do this in a natural way? It would take him years upon years. But the Shach, as we know, had already completed his entire commentary on the Shulchan Aruch in his early 20s. In his early 20s, he achieved this. Why? How did he do that? Because in those days, up until the time of the Shach and the Taz, says the Rebbe, people used to work, Torah scholars, the Talmidei Chachamim, the giants of the generation, used to work on the level of Ruach HaKodesh. When they would write, the words that would flow from the pen came out absolutely naturally. It's like an author. You can imagine an author in today's times who would sit behind a computer and within 2 or 3 days would come up with a bestseller. And you would ask them, how did you do that? In 2 or 3 days, you were a nothing. And then you came up in 2 or 3 days with a book that sold millions of copies. How did you do that? The person says to you, I sat by this computer and I began to type, and the thoughts just simply flowed out as if I didn't even know what I was writing, as if something was telling me, this is the story, this is what I need to share. And the whole world sees it as an ultimate story. How did the person do it? They only did it because God was feeding them with an abundance of thoughts that were beyond their control. If they were to think about it logically, they would never have come up with the story. But because their mind was open and expanded, God allows the thoughts to go through the person's mind, and immediately he writes down these thoughts. Well, when it came to Torah, all the Torah, up until the time of the Shach and the Taz, says the Rebbe, was written with divine inspiration. And even today, people can be rewarded with this concept of Ruach HaKodesh. God allows it. How do I know that? The Ramchal is telling us this in the 18th century, not so long ago. He's telling us that God talks to us and he tells over to us thoughts that we would never come up with on our own. But they only come to us because God allows the thought to travel into our minds. It is not through a physical manner. And so too God has allowed, it's needed, that they'll be found in with regards to this good that we're speaking about, the opposite. V'hu, and it is, that a person is able to draw down upon himself darkness, ugliness, and a spirit of impurity, in not a natural manner. Let us give an example. For example, somebody wants to fiddle around with certain spiritual forbidden practices of sorcery. You can, for example, if you want to know more about it, there's a wonderful book called Faith and Folly, written by Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, the Rosh Yeshiva of Ahavat Shalom in Mea Sha'arim. And in this book, he describes the concepts of magic. And he has many, many great approbations to this book. It is really a bestseller. I recommend it for everybody. Gives a person ideas behind the importance of serving God in faith and not using these magic things. But he discusses a number of the magic things. But I just want to, off the surface, speak about one of them. For example, let's say a person is engaged in using a Ouija board. And a Ouija board, as everybody knows, in the old days, they had these, and there are different ways that they did it, but they even used to sell it as a game. It became a game that you could buy in the store. And you have this board and it has letters on it, and people put their hands onto these various objects, and when it's nice and dark and everybody's sitting in a dark room, they begin to talk to spirits, and this thing starts to move around and says certain things, and people think that they're tuning in with the spiritual worlds. Well, whether or not they are, we don't need to speak about that. But one thing for sure we can be guaranteed of is that if a person begins to set his mind in a direction that what he's doing is in order to connect with these spiritual beings, it could be possible that something will happen, something negative will happen. And what will happen through that? Says the Ramchal, God has allowed a system of Tumah, of impurity, to exist, which is not in the natural world. And that's dangerous. V'hu inyan Tumah sakishuv. And says the Ramchal, we don't need anybody else to speak about it. We're not speaking about even here the Ari at this point in time, and we're not speaking about madmen in any way. We're speaking about a great Torah scholar who tells us straight out, a Torah scholar who is accepted within all the norms of the Litvish yeshiva system. We can go by what he's saying. He is trusted. This is the matter of the impurity of magic. And talking to the dead. Another forbidden practice. Why is he telling us this? Because obviously there is something to it, which means if a person goes and he begins to cleave with his soul to this impurity, he can cleave to it. Something can happen. Just as a person can cleave to purity in the spiritual world, he can cleave to impurity. And unfortunately, the bad news is that cleaving to the impurity is a lot easier than cleaving to purity. But for example, in the world of purity, a person can go and daven at the kavarim of Tzadikim. He can go and daven at the graves of the great righteous individuals of each generation. And at the grave, he can cleave to the soul. We know because the Arizal points out to us that there are things that one can do there. Hishtathut, which means to lay oneself down, one's body on the grave of the tzaddik, where one puts one's head to the tzaddik's head and one's feet to the feet of the tzaddik. And one lies on the grave and one begins to contemplate of the thoughts that allow one to connect with the tzaddik through the performance of various nichudim, which can bring a person to an exceptionally high level. But this takes tremendous kedusha, tremendous holiness to acquire. On the other hand, one can, God forbid, do the same thing on the side of negativity, on the side of evil, dangerous things, and people think they can play around with it. Well, anybody who does so is going to be responsible for his actions and will ultimately end up in a place he does not want to be. Here is the danger of trying to work in the spiritual worlds when one doesn't know what one is getting oneself into. And the Ramchal points out to us over here, the important thing is that just as God has created a world of spirituality which exists in goodness, there is an entire world of spirituality that exists with evil. The Torah has distanced itself, it distanced us from these methods. The Torah says to us, stay far from these things. The inyanam and all these matters. It comes about through the mentioning of various names. Just by using one's mouth, one can cause something to happen with certain conditions. Hashpa'os hatumah, v'zuhama, through the flow of impurity and pollution. Which is from the furthest part away from God. And this is the opposite of cleaving to him. In Tanya, in our shiurim that we're learning together, we're speaking about how to cleave to God. I want the keys to the room that tells me I can cleave to God. There are two rooms in front of me. One room is filled with gold and treasures, and the other room is filled with snakes and scorpions. And somebody says, which key do you want? Do you want to enter the world, into the room which is filled with gold and treasures, or do you want to enter into the room which is filled with snakes and scorpions? It is only the evil person who wants to enter into this room that is filled with snakes and scorpions. He thinks he will achieve his goal in life through the room of snakes and scorpions. But for me, I want the world where the room where everything over there is filled with gold and treasures. When I study Torah, when I fulfill the mitzvot and I cleave, as we said in Tanya, to the limbs of God, at that point in time, I'm cleaving to the holiness. I'm cleaving to goodness, the best part of creation. On the other hand, says the Ramchal, believe it, God has set up another room. And in that room, in the spiritual chambers, there are only snakes and scorpions. When you get there, there's going to be a lot of hissing and a lot of noise going on. And perhaps you'll start thinking that these particular things are there for you and they're going to help you. And maybe you're going to throw one at a friend or an enemy, who knows what, because you need to do something effective in the world. But they're going to turn on you because the snakes and the scorpions are dangerous. But the gold, that's going to give me the cleaving that I need to God. Hadvekas bo mamash. There's a real cleaving to God. That's what I want. Every person should ask himself where he's going. And that thing is drawn from that evil. As we mentioned before, though we haven't done the shiur yet, we can go back and we can do it. That these things that they have placed into them already, the decrees of God, shemos, yuzkarubam, certain names that are mentioned about them. And through mentioning these impure names, a person can draw down impurity, but madregas yaduas, through various known levels, which is not in the way of nature. These words of the Ramchal are very powerful, as anybody can see. The Ramchal has brought us into an amazing section of the Torah. He wants to tell us that there's the two beautiful paths that God has allowed us to connect with: the side of purity, the side of impurity. When we study Torah, when we learn our Tanya, when we learn our Gemara, when we learn our Halacha, we cleave to the side of good. The more we cleave to goodness, the more we purify ourselves, that we can think in a good way. The more we connect with the opposite side, or we are lackadaisical and we don't want to bother with the good side, we end up ultimately cleaving to the bad, then we end up with the snakes and the scorpions. And in the spiritual world, that is exactly what exists over there. We have the choice. God has put these worlds before us, and he keeps on telling us, choose which world you want to be a part of. Again, the point of what the Ramchal wants to tell us, he's not telling us the secrets. He's not telling us how we do it. He didn't tell us how to exactly go about saying a holy name. And he didn't tell us exactly how to go about using a profane name or whatever the case may be. What he's telling us is, this is how God has created the world. This is how he set it up. We must be aware of these things. And through learning more about it, we will understand better about the path that we need to take in our own lives, which ultimately we hope will be a path that will lead us to a closeness to God, a cleaving to God. Ultimately, that we feel such a love for God that although we won't do it, we really wish for this kalut hanefesh. We wish for this total state of being in ecstasy, where we're completely absorbed into the godliness of God himself. And with this, I come to the end of the shiur, and thank you for joining me. Thank you very much. I hope that you enjoyed the shiur. If you did, please click on the like button underneath the video, and share the video also. Why not make a positive comment, give me some encouragement, and click on the subscribe button there to subscribe to my channel, and the bell so that you'll be notified of future shiurim. Of course, if you want to be in touch with me, I'm Eliyahu Shir from www.lovingkindness.co, and I would be only too happy to be in touch with you. Feel free to partner with us in the activities that we're involved in. We'll find out more about what we're doing, and let's share more Torah and do more of what we can together. Thank you for joining me. I wish you everything of the best until our next shiur. Shalom, shalom. Bye-bye.